Welcome back to this continuing series of lectures in the topics, in the principles of macroeconomics. I'm Professor Sondgeroth at Austin Community College. Today, we're going to have a small lecture, actually, hopefully it will be less than an hour, on topic 17 on the definition of GDP. So let's get going. Let's go to lecture topics and open the exam 2 topics in a new tab. Here we go. So there's topic 17 from chapter 7. We're going to have to give a verbal definition of GDP, including all the major elements of the definition, and derive a general mathematical formula from this definition. We're going to discuss why money prices are used, and I'm not sure. I thought I had that somewhere else in here, but I don't see it. We'll come to it when we get to that part of the PowerPoint. C, what items are not included. D, how is it calculated using the expenditure approach? And that's going to relate back to what we had already discussed in the circular flow up here. And then F, how is it calculated? E, how is it calculated using the income approach, which is also tied to the circular flow, a model used in macroeconomics. And then we'll talk about the value-added approach, and finally discuss the problem of double counting. So let's open our PowerPoint for this topic. And get going. All right, and here it is. Whoops, I'd already opened it. So open. I'm going to want to draw on this, I think start with the black pen. And for the second slide, I'm going to start copying the elements of the topic I'm going to cover in the second slide. So there we go. And with the third slide, we give the definition of gross domestic product, which is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country annually. So let's mark out the different elements of this definition. First, it's the market value, which really means the money prices. So we want to talk about that. And only final goods and services are included here, no intermediate or primary resources like, say, oil or wheat from a farmer. And it's done annually, so it is a flow concept, not a stock, and it's within a country's borders. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 elements here to this definition, okay? So let's go to the money or market value of goods, because there are 2 alternates that we might choose instead of using the money value of all final goods and services. One of the most obvious ones is that they were all produced by labor. So why not use the amount of labor time to measure GDP? So all goods and services produced for sale or produced to meet our needs have had labor used to produce them. So we could measure it by labor time. And this is the so-called labor theory of value. And Adam Smith, in The Wealth of Nations, indicated this is how he would calculate, let's say, what he called the wealth of the nations. Maybe should have called it the income of the nations. And it got its most thorough statement by Karl Marx in his examination of capitalism. I'm going to talk about why we don't use that later, but I just want to indicate that labor is common to all of the things that have been produced to meet our needs. And then, since all of these things have been produced to satisfy people's needs, wants, and desires, why not use utility? That is satisfaction, the amount of satisfaction that they produce in people. So we could state the GDP on some basis of the total amount of satisfaction generated when consuming the goods and services. And theoretically, that might be a good idea too. All of these goods are only produced to meet our needs, wants, and desires. And doing so, they do produce utility or satisfaction. And of course, like the labor theory of value, there are insurmountable problems with doing this. And that leaves us with the third common element of all goods and services, and that they all have a price if they've been produced for sale on a market. And the easiest way to calculate GDP is just to use that price, okay? And that's what we're going to do, all right? So the next element are only final goods and services. So no intermediate goods or services are included. They're all excluded so as to avoid double counting. And we want to come back to this at the end of this lecture to look at an example, very simple example of what would happen if we included them. And basically, the GDP would be much larger than it actually is if we included the value of the intermediate product when it was produced and then sold to the next step in the production or manufacturing process, and included in that step and the third step and the fourth step, and finally it's sold to the final consumer. And basically you would have the value of an intermediate product perhaps counted 4 or 5 times. We don't want to do that. So only goods and services produced. Now the third element is only goods and services produced in a given period of time are included. So when we talk per period of time, we are referring to a rate of change or flow. GDP is a flow concept, not a stock concept. And here, I don't know, can I write out here? Oh, I can. So GDP is actually a measure of national income, and that is a flow concept. A stock concept that is closely related to income, but shouldn't be confused with it, is wealth. Okay. Another flow versus stock concept that we use in this macro course is saving. We have savings per period of time. We set aside money every paycheck, or at least we should. And then we accumulate those, the amount of saving we do per period of time, in our savings. Now that's so only the S distinguishes the flow from the stock. And another flow versus a stock that I use in the circular flow, and I discussed this last lecture, is the flow of water through a dam and the volume of water behind the dam. Okay. And usually this is given in cubic feet per second. And this is in, I don't know, usually cubic feet just cubic feet, the volume of cubic feet in the lake, or the number of gallons they estimate might be in a lake. All right. So basically, that's going to come. I'm going to use this analogy of the flow of a river and the amount of water behind a dam to measure GDP in our circular flow. The fourth element is that it's the value of what is produced within a country's borders. I should have had countries, borders, not plural, no matter who produced it, okay? So it could be produced by foreign workers or foreign capital, but if it's produced in the borders, then it's included in GDP. All right. Oops, did I skip one? Oh, and here's the general formula, conceptual formula. So it's the money price of all final goods and services. So, and maybe I'll use red. So Q1 is the quantity of all final goods and services of a particular nature, maybe Macintosh apples, Bartlett pears, 28-inch white shoestrings, Reebok tennis shoes. Anyway, there are a lot of these goods, perhaps millions of them, if you start distinguishing like haircuts and the different kinds of haircuts barbers give, we could expand this into millions. All right. So, and so all of these numbers represent a different product or service, and the quantity of all final goods and services produced in a nation in a given year's period of time. And then these prices are the prices connected to each individual identifiable product or service, okay? And so what we do is we take the price times the quantity right here, and we add them all up. And so there could be millions of items here. So GDP would equal the money value of all the final goods and services produced in a nation in a given year's period of time. And we're going to use this equation in a little more simple version. And that would be this. For those of you taking, I guess, vector calculus, this might make more sense to you that each of these is a vector of prices and a vector of quantity. But if you're not familiar with that concept, just think of P being like the average of all prices, and Q somehow the average of all goods and services, and you take them times each other and you get this nominal GDP. Okay. And this is a much easier formula to deal with, okay? Where P represents a price level, basically what we covered before the first test. with an index like the Consumer Price Index, or we can use the GDP deflator, and Q is a quantity of all goods and services known as real GDP, or actually, we might actually just call it national output of goods and services, okay? And we're going to be using this formula later on in the course. So I'll remind you of it when we get there. So here we go again with why we use money rather than the other things. And let's deal with labor first. And the point here is that let's say we have a neurosurgeon who spends 2 hours doing surgery on someone who's been in an auto accident, or perhaps removing a tumor for someone's brain, and is successful in saving the person's life, and is well paid for his services, versus, let's say, someone who still does very valuable work, who keeps the campus I work at clean and serviceable. 2 hours of their work versus 2 hours of a neurosurgeon's work. How do you compare that? Well, you can do it, but it's a very complex matter, and you have to say, well, there's embodied human capital, much more of it in the surgeon's work, and bits of that are expended as he does his work. So he accumulates that human capital through his training, many long years of difficult training, and with each surgery he or she does, they a bit of that training gets transferred in addition to their simple labor. So you could define some simple labor time and compound it with a given amount of training. But how do you really compare the two? And usually how this is resolved is you look at the wages paid the let's say the janitor versus the wage paid for the services of a neurosurgeon, and that's and you say that the neurosurgeon's hours are a multiple of the most simple basic unit of labor. So, for example, maybe the neurosurgeon's labor is worth 100 times. So, if the neurosurgeon worked for 2 hours, it would be equivalent to 200 hours of work by the janitor. So the problem is that you're using prices to measure labor. So why not just use price? Wages are prices, by the way. And of course, there are other problems dealt with by labor theory of value people. Like you could ask, well, wouldn't it mean the less efficient you are and the longer it takes to produce something, the more value would be created? So efficiency is the enemy of a high level of GDP here. And then you have to deal with the idea that, well, these service providers have to compete with each other, and we're only willing to pay a certain amount, and we would like to pay the least amount for the best work. And so this will drive us down to the most efficient level of production. And I suppose that argument works in a capitalist market, but certainly not in a socialist one, where there's no competition. So I could say more about that, but let's just leave that there. Now, we could measure and it looks like I should get rid of the word "the" there, which doesn't seem to be useful. Some measure of utility. Well, the problem here is that the utility I get from something may be different than yours. So each individual has different utility schedule, if you follow me. And I usually use food examples here. I do really love sushi now, but when I was college age, if you asked me if I wanted to go eat raw fish, I would think, you're crazy. And there are many people like that today uh, who just can't think of their eating raw meat of any kind. So I usually tell a story of my father-in-law offering me a baked calf's eye, which he took carved out of the skull of a calf when I met him for the first time. This did not seem appetizing to me, but apparently is very delicious and very tasty. So I should have accepted it with gratitude. I didn't, but there you go. So in other words, since we can't compare people's utility schedules across different people, how can we measure satisfaction? And the simplest one is basically, and that's what I put here, is just use the price people are willing to pay for the product, okay? And now we go to what's not included. So certain non-market goods and services, such as chores performed at home, like making meals, cleaning up after the meals, cleaning up the house, keeping your yard up, repairing the automobile, um, growing vegetables in your garden, trimming the trees, washing your car in your driveway. All of these, of course, give you satisfaction and help maintain your standard of living, but they are not produced for sale and hence do not have a price and therefore are not included in GDP. And maybe we could say that that is a weakness of this measure of GDP when we get to weaknesses in the next section. So anything that's not produced for sale is not included. Also, any underground activities, both legal and illegal, are not included. So, for example, the sale of illegal drugs, while they do have a price, that they are not included in GDP. Prostitution is the sale of sexual services in most states, not Nevada, are not included. I guess they are included in Nevada. Um, so gambling, so there are underground gambling places in Austin I'm vaguely aware of. And I suppose you need to pay to get in, and then you're in and it's like a casino. The people who operate it take part of the amount being gambled. That is not included. And there are legal activities too, which I suppose I might even be guilty of. I'm not sure, but when I say hire someone to come by and clean my house once every 2 weeks, they want to be paid in cash. So I do pay it in cash, and I I presume it's up to them to file their income taxes. But if not, this activity, this service is not included in GDP. Um, so things like that, and by the way, trimming trees too. I've hired people to uh, cut the dead wood out of my trees and remove the ball moss, and they'll give me a nice discount if I pay them in cash. I'm assuming quite probably correctly there that they're not going to report that income. But I suppose that I'm not doing anything illegal, but we're just paying in cash. So also, sales of used goods are not included. So I hear they have a used textbook or a used automobile or the value of a house built in a previous year when it's sold. That is not included. Though, of course, the services of the real estate agent or the lawyer who's part of this transaction, that will be included, uh, as will brokers in the next little photo. So if you buy and sell bonds and stocks, the value of those bonds and stocks, those transactions are not included. You're just transferring financial assets from one person to another. And one person has a stock, the other person has some money, they exchange. So that's all that's happened, is there's been a transfer of money to the person who once owned the stock, and the stock to the person who had the money. Now the broker will get paid, and that service will be included in GDP, okay? Also, government transfer payments such as Social Security, unemployment compensation, they are not included in GDP. And here we have another thing that's not included in GDP, and that is leisure time, which does create satisfaction and satisfies our wants, needs, and desires. Okay? Bunch of things not included in GDP. So keep all those different categories in mind when you get to the multiple choice test, and do the homework and the chapter quiz for this chapter, chapter 7. Well, I guess bads aren't included. GDP counts the goods and services. It does not net out the air and water pollution created in manufacturing and consuming them. And that's another reason economists argue maybe GDP isn't the best measure of well-being. So we'll get to that in the next topic. Now we come to the expenditure approach, how to measure GDP by the expenditure approach instead of finding every different little good and service and finding the quantity produced in a year and taking the price of times that quantity. We could just add the amount of money spent by buyers of final goods and services, thus avoiding double counting, and we won't include expenditures on intermediate goods. Okay, goods in the hands of their final users, whether that be consumers buying goods that they are going to consume, or business firms buying capital equipment, but not raw material and intermediate goods, and governments buying goods and services for the functions that governments perform, including education like this. Okay, so paying me is part of the goods and services the government's purchase. So here we add together all of the sectors. We add household consumption, gross business investment and capital equipment, and we'll see also inventory change, and government expenditures for goods and services, not transfer payments. Those are excluded here. and the amount of money foreigners pay for exports, which could include raw materials and intermediate goods, minus the amount we pay as consumers for our shoes, for example, or our smartphones, uh, capital goods, maybe transportation equipment, computers, and government expenditures, like paying for the use of bases in foreign countries. And let's see, run through these. So consumption would include durable goods, non-durable goods, and services. Let's quickly go through these. Durable goods are things that are expected to last more than 3 years. It's a general rule, such as refrigerators, ovens, or cars. Every time I give a lecture on this, I think, gosh, most of my clothes are durable then because I've had them for more than 3 years. But I think you get the idea. They don't mention apparel here, but that does seem to be durable. But it is counted as a non-durable. Non-durable goods are goods that are not expected to last for more than 3 years, such as food, okay? Services are intangible items such as lawn care, car repair and entertainment, medical care, getting your hair cut, going to the beauty salon. So now we turn from consumption to investment. And this is business investment. Newly purchased capital goods, machinery, factories, transportation equipment, communication equipment. This is going to turn out to be a big one. Changes in business inventories. So we're going to have to include that investment in order to, like, if something is produced but not sold in a year, it's an inventory, yet it has been produced, so we need to take account of it. So any change in inventory over the year, that will be it. And the construction of new residential housing, most of which is done by developers now, but a few people actually build their own homes. But that is a type of investment also, okay? Government purchases includes federal, state, and local government. Here at the local government level, we have, independent school districts. What else? Planned unit developments, the community college district, the hospital district, the city governments, the county governments, the state governments. Okay, so all the way up. They take care of all of these things, and they pay for investment in highways, bridges, and also the services they provide, to keep things going. So it does exclude transfer payments to persons that are not made in return for goods and services currently supplied, okay? And then net exports are exports of goods, even raw materials and intermediate goods and final goods produced here in the United States and sold to people abroad. And imports, of course, are the purchase of the same type of goods by households, business firms, and governments. All right, so here's the expenditure approach broken down, and we're mainly going to be based on this. This is household consumption, business investment, government spending, and net exports, okay? And we add those together to get GDP. Let's take a look at GDP. This is from 2007. And wow, let me see, 2007, 2011. You can see consumption is the biggest part of GDP. This was right before the big recession. Let's let's just calculate what part of GDP consumption is. So it's let's back up. It's 9.73 divided by 13.84, and that looks like 70.3% of GDP that year. Let's take a look at investment, which is 2.12 divided by 13.84, and that's a little over 7%. I just thought it was a little bit larger. Let's take a look at government now. That's 2.69 divided by 13.84. 7%. Did I get that second one right? It doesn't seem correct. Oh, it's 15%. Sorry about that. I'm just going to make this into a 15%, okay? 15.3%. And then this is 19.4% of GDP. Yeah, I guess that adds up to 100%, actually 104%. So notice that net exports are negative, so 0.7, whoops, I need to get my calculator up here. 0.7 divided by 13.84 is, looks like it's about negative 5.1%. Let me get the calculator up and get this correct. So this was 15.3%. So these three together, it looks like that would be 34.7, and that would be 105 approximately percent. We have some rounding errors here. And minus 5% was going to get us approximately 100%. All right, interesting. All right, let's go to the next one. And this is from 2011, which is right after the Great Recession was 2008 and 9. We started coming out of the recession slowly in the middle of 9. So basically a couple years after the recession. And I've done these calculations, so I don't have, that's 71.1%. Investment has been depressed a bit. It's just recovering because business firms have been pretty much shocked by that Great Recession. This is bumped way up to stimulate the economy. That's 19.7, and this is negative 3.8%, okay? Anyway, you can see there's pretty consistent that the consumption is the biggest element of this. And here is, I looked from the last quarter of last year, we're up to $21 trillion, or 21,747 billion. Look, household consumption is down to 68% approximately. Investment is way up to 18%. That's a very good sign of a growing economy. And government spending is about the same at 17%. Net exports are now only at negative 2.5%. Anyway, that's the expenditure approach. And here is the data from 18 and 19. You can see they've broken them down a little bit more. And I want to get this change in private inventories is very important in our discussion here, okay? All right, and I guess there's one more thing I'd like to do um, for the circular flow. And where was that? Teaching online. Nope, it was this one. Um, question 16. I want to open this in a new link. Here it is. So, if you recall this, a circular flow, I'm going to copy this and open Edge because I can draw an edge. There we go. And so let me reduce this a little bit so I can see the whole thing. There we go. And I want to add notes. I think I'll do it in blue. So here's the amount of money consumers are spending. Now, some of it gets drained off to buy exports, okay? Imports like shoes and smartphones. But this is that 70% of the flow. So if we build a dam here and measure the flow of money through there, we're going to get by the expenditure approach. So I can't write C, so C. And then we're going to take a look at investment spending, which comes up here and joins and flows through, and capital goods are a final good and service, and changes in inventories, let's not forget that. And then we're going to I didn't have much room here. Government spending is going to join us. I guess I'll put G here, and come on. Oh, there it is. I know I reversed these two. Investment. And then, of course, we're going to add, what color can I use here? I don't know. Pink. The exports are the money flowing from foreign economies in here to buy goods, but we do have to subtract the money flowing out of the country to pay for goods and services produced in other countries. And so at the top here, whoops, let me try to drag this up. There we go. We're going to have to add the amount of goods sold abroad minus imports. There you go. That's the expenditure approach. We build that dam right here, all the money flowing through here, is the money that is calculated in GDP through the expenditure approach. Only one dam. It's like the cubic feet per second through the dam that's holding back the water of a lake. All right, now we go to the income approach, and basically purchases made in product markets, of course, flow to business firms. And so here is the product market, and that money flows down here to business firms, okay? Business then use the money to buy resources in the resource market. And once again, most of the money then flows up here to rent land, to hire labor, and as a return to the people who use capital. In other words, if they're using people's capital, you have to pay for that use. And so it flows up here and then gets sent to the households in the form of wages and salaries, rent, interest, and then profit of the business firms themselves, okay? The sum of these resource payments and total income, which flows to households in this simple economy, total purchases, expenditures equal total income, because total purchases equal GDP and total purchases equal total income. It follows that GDP equals total income. Yeah, that's pretty simple, and I'm going to show some exceptions here. Here is a circular flow from the textbook, and basically you can see this is where I draw one dam, and then of course we can draw another dam here in this circular flow and measure the flow. The flow coming in here to buy all these goods and services should equal the flow here into the households. It gets a little bit more complicated, but you get the idea. So national income is the total income earned by U.S. citizens and businesses, no matter where they reside or are located. National income is the sum of the payments to resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So notice that national income is a little bit different than GDP. GDP is the value of everything produced in a country. National income is the income earned by citizens of the country, no matter where they earned it, in this country or in some other country. So national income equals the compensation of employees, proprietors' income, that is non-corporate business firms' income, corporate profits, total profits, which would include corporate profit taxes, dividends, and undistributed profits, retained earnings. We're looking at the gross profits, rental income, and net interest. That equals national income. So we talk about compensation of employees, consists of wages and salaries paid to employees plus employers, contributions to Social Security and employee benefit plans, plus monetary value of fringe benefits, tips, and paid vacations. That's all included in compensation. Proprietors' income includes all forms of income earned by self-employed individuals and owners of unincorporated businesses, including unincorporated farmers. And I put unincorporated because where I grew up, most farms, by the time I graduated from high school, were incorporated because it reduced their liabilities. Corporate profits include all income earned by stockholders of the corporation, and I should say it includes retained earnings and corporate profits taxes too. Rental income received by individuals for the use of their non-monetary assets, land, houses, offices. It also includes returns to individuals who hold copyrights and patents, and it includes imputed value to owner-occupied houses. This is a hard one. We talked about the difficulty of that with CPI. Net interest is interest income received by U.S. households and government minus the interest they paid out. So how do we get from national income earned by all citizens to GDP? Well, we have to add up the national income, and then we have to subtract from it income earned from the rest of the world, okay, by people who are citizens of the country. And then we need to add income earned by citizens of other countries and our country. And then we add indirect business taxes and capital consumption allowance. take cognizance of the statistical discrepancy and get the GDP. So basically, the indirect business taxes we have to take cognizance of, and we're not retained earnings or corporate profits, but we do have to take cognizance of the capital consumption allowance or depreciation, okay? And so this is pretty complicated. So we add up all sources of national income, we subtract income earned from outside of the country, we add income earned by foreigners inside our country, we add indirect business taxes and capital consumption allowance, and let's just forget the statistical discrepancy right now to get GDP. So that's how the income approach is equal to the expenditure approach, okay? And here are all sources of the income approach. We can see national income. That's all of these things up in here. Then we have to subtract income earned from the rest of the world. Then we add income earned by foreigners here. We add the indirect business taxes that businesses collect for governments and send to them, like sales taxes and excise taxes. We have to add the depreciation. This is what this is, depreciation, statistical discrepancy, and that's how we get from national income to GDP. I said it was going to be a little bit more complex than that simple circular flow shown by the textbook. And now we take a look at the value added approach, so expenditure approach, the income approach, and the value added approach. So here we have a simple, I think I got this from the textbook, ice cream cones, it looks like, is what's being made here. So the farmer grows the wheat, which the cones are made of, and he raises the cows and milks them, from which the ice cream is made. And we say the cost of materials is zero. That's probably not true, but anyway, we have to start somewhere from scratch. So we say the value added by the farmer is the value of his sales of milk and wheat to the cone and ice cream factory, okay? And then, of course, he has added, the farmer, $100. Now the cone factory takes the wheat and the milk and makes them into cones and ice cream, and sells this to some middle person, wholesaler, for $250, okay? But it has to subtract the cost of materials, and has added 150, which basically could be the labor they paid, and the rent and interest, so labor cost, capital cost, land cost, and they've added $150. The middle person then takes this wholesale good and has his sales people go around and sell it, and they sell it for $400. He needs to subtract the 250 in intermediate goods, and so his sales people and he have added $150 value to the product. That is sold to the final retailer, Baskin Robbins or Amy's ice cream, buys it for $400, and they sell it to us for $500. That is the value of the final product. And so you can see that Amy's or Baskin Robbins adds $100 of value. So when we add up all the value added, we get $500, which is exactly equal to the cost of the final product. So basically, this is in essence the value added. Shows that the income is equal to the value of the final product. If we were to add up all the intermediate products, you can see that we would double count or triple count, or 1, 2, 3, yeah, triple count some products, and we would overstate the GDP immensely, okay? And this is the same thing with the different thing about making bread, value added. So with the expenditure approach, we only include final goods and services. So gross value added equals the sum of all values added by enterprise. So the sale of goods minus the purchase of intermediate goods sold will indeed equal gross value added, which is indeed equal to the expenditure cost of only final goods and services. All right. And that wraps up topic 17. I will see you with topic 18 on the strengths and weaknesses of GDP as a measure of well-being of a nation.